this video, I'm going to uncover how the rich use the buy, borrow, die paradox to minimize their taxes and appear less wealthy on paper, all while preserving and growing their wealth. As a CPA and the owner of a tax technology company, I've spent years advising high net worth individuals on sophisticated tax strategies. These hours of consultations have given me a deep understanding of how the rich legally maneuver through the tax system in ways that most people aren't even aware of. The truth is that most billionaires are not paying more in taxes as their wealth skyrockets, like the average person does. And I'm going to show you exactly how to implement the same thing in your life so you can reduce your taxes. All right, let's dive into the video. So first off, what is this buy, borrow, die paradox or strategy? And basically, it's a financial tactic where individuals buy assets, they borrow against those assets, and then they pass those assets on to their heirs, all while minimizing taxes along the way. And this idea or this strategy really kind of dives into two tax concepts, and that's the step up in basis and the borrowing against assets concepts. Let's break those down. First off, the step up in basis. Basically, when someone dies, their heirs inherit that assets that they have at the fair market value, not whatever the original purchase price is. They inherit their assets those assets get passed on, and they inherit them at the fair market value at the date of death. So if they go day after death and sell that asset, there'd be no capital gain tax on that. So this is a powerful strategy to hold assets until death to give the best tax advantage to your heirs. Now, borrowing against assets. Let's talk about this concept. Basically, borrowing against assets like stocks or real estate doesn't count as income. That loan money that you receive from that borrowing is not income to you. So it's also not taxable to you. So who do we typically see this? Usually the ultra wealthy, because they have significant assets that they can leverage against. So those are the people that you typically see this strategy utilized in. But let's talk about reality. Who can actually implement this strategy? Anybody with appreciating assets. This strategy can be available to you. Now, it might not be a good fit for somebody obviously with no assets, or maybe just limited assets, or those that if they were to go out and borrow would have a high interest debt on that borrowing. This might not be a good fit. But as long as you have appreciating assets, this can be an extremely powerful strategy to be utilizing. So first off, why is it so effective? Let's walk into it. So it's basically being very tax efficient because you borrow against assets, you avoid capital gain taxes when you borrow against it, and then you can turn and utilize that borrowed amount to invest in even more items. And this is really how you can just create snowball effect of your wealth without spending necessarily your own money on it. So let's go through an example because I think this will help drive it home. Let's say that you had $1 million worth of stock. So you bought stock for $1 million, and that stock has now appreciated to $5 million. So you bought it for $1 million, it's now worth $5 million. If you sold that, you'd pay capital gain taxes of $4 million because you'd have $5 million minus what you paid for it, $1 million, $4 million capital gain tax, or you'd pay capital gain taxes on $4 million. But now let's say instead of selling it, you're going to borrow against that equity that you have in there. So let's just say you borrow $3 million against it. You're going to get $3 million in your pocket, and you're not going to have to pay any taxes on that $3 million. And you still hold the stock. So if you hold the stock until death, it's going to get stepped up basis on the date of death. And if you sell the day after the death, your heirs are going to pay no taxes on that. Now they'll have to pay back the loan, of course, but that is the power around the strategy. Let's go through another example using real estate. Let's just say you purchased real estate for $100,000 10 years ago. So you bought a piece of property for $100,000 10 years ago. It's now worth $200,000. So it's doubled in 10 years. And let's just say you're going to borrow against that. And let's say that you can borrow against that for $150,000. You're going to get $150,000 cash, tax-free. And then in 20 years, let's say that that person dies and the property is now worth $400,000. If that person sold that property the day before death, they would pay taxes. They would pay capital gain taxes on $300,000 of income. $400,000 is the value minus the sale, minus what they paid for it, $100,000. But if they waited and sold it the day after death, once it transferred to the heirs and then the heirs sold the date after death, they would have $0 in capital gain tax because they got a stepped up basis to the fair market value on the date of death. So that's the power behind this strategy. You see people like Jeff Bezos from Amazon and Elon Musk from Tesla. They've been known to borrow against their stock holding in their companies to fund lifestyle investments without having to sell any of their shares in their company or paying any taxes on that borrowing that they're doing. And so that's where the power of this. So now let's talk about how do we do it? Now remember, the strategy isn't just for the ultra wealthy. Anybody with appreciating assets can consider it and look into this. So we're going to do a step-by-step guide on what you need to do if you want to do this in your life. Step one, you need to acquire appreciated assets. So think of things like stock, real estate, businesses. Basically, if you buy a piece of real estate for $200,000, appreciates to $300,000, you've just gained $100,000 in equity without having to buy that $100,000. That's where the power is. Step 2, borrow against those assets. So once your assets have appreciated, you can borrow against them. You'll likely not be able to borrow 100% of that equity that's built up into it, but a good portion of it, you'll be able to borrow against. So if we use that example where you borrowed a piece of real estate, or you bought a piece of real estate for $200,000, it appreciated to $300,000, you're going to be able to borrow against that $300,000, even though you originally only paid $200,000 for it. Step 3, use the borrow funds wisely. Use those funds for other investments. The interest on the loan may be tax deductible depending on the investment type that you utilized that loan money for. So in our example, let's say you used the borrowed funds and invested it in another real estate property. This is growing your wealth even more. And so that's a good use of those funds. Step 4 is planning for the future. This is where things can get a little bit dark in the conversation. In a perfect world, you live forever. But if we want to really find a situation that's going to be most beneficial to your heirs, in a perfect situation, you're going to hold on to that appreciated asset until death. Far too often we talk with individuals who have aging parents who are selling off all of their assets before death. And they want to do that so they can pass it on to their heirs and not have to have them worry about the selling piece of that. But what they don't realize is that this is not a great strategy, because as they're unloading all these assets before death, they're paying capital gain taxes on all of those sales. Whereas if they waited until death and their heirs sold those assets, there would likely be little or no capital gain tax on those sales. And so that's where we want to be strategic. We want to plan for the future. How are we going to exit this, and when are we going to exit it? And can we, if we need cash today, can we borrow against instead of exiting this type of plan and paying capital gain taxes on it? So in our example, if you pass away and your heirs inherit that $300,000 real estate property, they would inherit it at its current market value, not the original purchase price. So if they then go and sell it the next day, there is no capital gain that they have to pay, and they can pay off the remaining loan balance that was there. So with this strategy, we always say, talk with your financial advisor about these various steps. But it can be a very powerful tax strategy and wealth building strategy if done correctly. Remember, step 1, acquire appreciated assets. These can be things like stock, real estate, business, whatever it might be. Borrow against those assets. The equity that you have, if those assets appreciated, the equity that you have in there, you can borrow against. Use those borrow funds wisely. Invest in other things. Grow your wealth. Utilize this opportunity because those borrow funds, not taxable. And then plan for the future. Plan for your exit on this. And the most ideal, perfect world exit is that you die and then those assets get passed on to your heirs. That's the most tax efficient way. So this buy, borrow, die paradox is a great opportunity, again, where you buy appreciated assets, you borrow against it. When you borrow, when you take that loan from that asset, you pay no taxes on that money that you received. And then you die, which passes this asset onto your heirs at fair market value at the date of death, and they can sell the next day with no capital gain tax. So this video has given you a step-by-step guide on how to implement the buy, borrow, die strategy in your own life. If you want more information on exactly how you can implement this and hundreds of other tax strategies in your life, please click the first link in the description. It will take you to a page where you can sign up to our tax software for business owners, where we will take you by the hand and guide you through implementing each one of these strategies in your own life.